Hello, and welcome back to Full Time with Meg Linehan. I am Tamerra Griffin, and am joined, as always, by my co-host, Meg Linehan. Meg, have you got your breath from NWSL quarterfinals last weekend?
That was... just the entire time. Also, Ella Stevens is on the wing. Also, can we just very quickly RIP to the best press box in America?
Yes.
At Red Bull Arena, because that's going to become club seats. I know no one probably cares about this beyond soccer media, but that was truly one of the best places to watch a game in this country. I was so sad to have that be my last game, but I will say watching Ella Stevens from 20 feet away from my eyeballs and just being like, ma'am, you are Spanish in your soul.
Yes. I was at that game too, Gotham versus the Thorns, and for me the moment was when she basically chested almost a through ball.
Yes.
It
was almost an assist.
Who else in the league?
Just the sheer audacity. Yeah. So it's just it's such a fun reminder to actually be at some of these games. And postseason obviously has a different weight. I was also in the sheer panic mode of I had a flight that night back home.
I remember you
and just
told
being
me.
I would love a game winner in regulation time. That would be ideal for me. And then thank you, Roosevelt.
Yeah, my Sunday scaries were compelling me to extend the weekend as long as possible, so I personally was hoping for extra time, but I know we have many more games ahead of us, which is what we are going to be discussing this week. We are in the thick of playoff season, and ahead of the semifinals, we are going to be chatting with Washington Spirit and U.S. Women's National Team midfielder Hal Hershfelt about the journey that her club team has been on and some of her experiences with the U.S. National Team. And then we're going to pivot to end of season awards in the NWSL, and for that, we are going to be bringing in Jeff Rueter of The Athletic to break down each of the categories and have a little debate about who we think should be taking home these awards. But first, Meg, we have to discuss the big news that came out since our last episode. Lily Johannes has declared for the U.S. Women's National Team. Huge, huge news, and the timing of it is especially juicy.
It's spicy. Let's do a little away trip to the Netherlands. Lily Johannes. But yeah, I do think obviously the U.S. Women's National Team had been, I think, very careful in giving her the time and space to make that decision. Emma Hayes has talked about that a lot because she also gets a lot of questions about what Lily Johannes was thinking. But obviously it's a big win. I think it's also, even a little more remarkable in light of what happened this last week, we'll be honest. And then, I just think it does. When we talk about having so many options at midfield, now you add Lily Johannes into the mix. But Tamerra, you are the one who I think has written the definitive Lily Johannes story. So how are you feeling about this news?
When I was in the Netherlands earlier this year, interviewing her and meeting her family and watching her play with Ajax in Champions League, I honestly, for as provocative of the question for those who are unaware, Lily Johannes essentially was able to decide whether she wanted to represent the U.S. Women's National Team or the Dutch national team because she moved to the Netherlands with her family when she was young, has been there since 2017, plays for a Dutch club, and had been fielding interest from both national teams. And honestly, when I considered how she was only 16 at the time I met her, she's now 17, but I honestly was so much more concerned with how she was going to arrive at her decision than what the decision was going to be because she's so young. And the maturity in her game can sometimes obscure that fact. But one thing that I was always sure of was that she was going to take her time. That was the resounding sort of message from her family. And I honestly was expecting it to take maybe a little bit longer. But I think I am curious sort of the extent of the U.S.'s performance at the Olympics, the fact that Euros are coming up next summer, feels like this summer, practically next year, may have spurred her decision. But she's an incredibly grounded person for her age. I think you sort of have to be playing at that level, given how young she is. And just as a human being, I can only imagine how much more at peace she feels. And really how being at peace is going to unlock hopefully another level for her as a player now that she's not having to carry this anymore.
Yeah, just having been at her first cap for the U.S. Women's National Team, it was so interesting of just knowing okay, it's her first cap and there's not necessarily an answer here, but obviously like she very much impressed. The goal, like everything about that game, right? Like kind of this story to, you know, like just kind of crazy first game, and then to have the decision kind of be in this stasis for a little bit. I think hopefully like she feels like she has made the right decision. She had the support that she needed throughout the process, but I do think that there is very much a like, we got her vibe coming out of the U.S. women's national team camp.
100%. I feel like the reaction to that reminded me of the way the U.S. women's national team celebrated that goal when like the whole bench just like sprinted to the corner and she got lost in like the hug huddle. That's what it felt like. So
I mean, it is interesting to maybe compare contrast of Lily Johannes to the Kat Macario swap as well, which I think was a little less of a courtship process, right? Like it felt maybe a little bit more inevitable with Kat Macario, but there was a question of USA or Brazil for her. And so, yeah, it is kind of interesting to see like that there is maybe a case for players of that caliber to consider nations outside the U.S., considering where the U.S. has been over the past year. But I do think the Olympics is going to help justify some decisions for players of that nature. So
100%. And I can only imagine we're going to see more of these kinds of stories just because of how much more global our world is becoming, and the options that players are going to have when it comes to things like dual citizenship. So Lily Johannes has made her decision, and we now will see if she makes the next U.S. women's national team roster ahead of these European fixtures. Keeping with the international football news, let's discuss Canada, because there has been somewhat of an update in that regard. What are the top lines of this, Meg?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so they did release the investigation report. It's heavily redacted. I honestly, like, there's not a huge amount that we didn't already know and didn't know during the Olympics itself. I mean, the real main development out of this that honestly I don't think should really surprise anyone is that head coach Bev Priestman is officially out from the program. I don't think that there was a path for her to return even before this investigation. She'd been suspended by FIFA for a year, and then the video analyst and the assistant coach involved also gone. Really, for me, like, this still feels like maybe not the end of the process, just because, you know, I think there was a sense of, okay, the brass at Canada Soccer didn't have an awareness, but I am maybe a little concerned that Bev Priestman is going to take the fall for something that is a little bit more systemic. John Herdman, who is former head coach of the U.S. or the Canada women's soccer team and then went to Canada men's soccer team, could not be interviewed because of timing. That's an interview that I think is necessary, and they have seemingly promised will happen in some form. So that's kind of the next thing that I'm waiting to see. But obviously, Josh Cloak, who covers Canada for us, has weighed in on this at The Athletic stuff with a little bit of analysis on the women's national team. But honestly, like, yes, news, but not as much as I think probably people hope for.
Yeah, this is going to be an ongoing story, and we will, of course, keep you updated. To pivot to something a bit lighter, I don't know how else to make the transition, but that's where we are in the world right now, taking the good with the bad. Thank you so much for playing bingo with us. We have had a blast watching you guys filling out these chaotic squares now that the NWSL playoff season. And TikTok. And of course, we love hearing from you, even if you're not playing bingo. I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you have thoughts, feelings about the end of the season, heading into the semifinals, anything at all, you can always reach us via email at fulltime@theathletic.com. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by Washington Spirit midfielder and U.S. women's national team player Hal Hershfelt. We are pleased to be joined by Washington Spirit and U.S. women's national team midfielder Hal Hershfelt. Hal, thank you so much for joining us. Just to kick us off. Sorry. We're rolling.
Yep.
Just to kick us off, Hal, talk to me about Rowdy Audi. That quarterfinal against Bay FC, I was only watching it on TV, but I could hear the crowd through the TV, and it was unlike a sound I'd ever heard really coming out of that stadium. What was it like for you playing in an atmosphere like that in your first playoff game as an NWSL player?
Yeah, I feel like that gives us energy, especially in tight games like that where we give up a late goal and we have to come back. I feel like it really gives you an extra boost of motivation when you're playing in front of a crowd like that.
Just in terms of, I mean, obviously it was hard for us to not spot your willingness to play along with the bingo card. So first of all, thank you for playing along with it. It's great energy. But what inspired you to post about it? It was delightful on our end.
Yeah, I saw it. It was actually my mom who sent it to me. It like popped up on her Twitter feed, and she texted it to me. I heard through the grapevine that was flying around, and then finally I got a screenshot of it, and I was like, this is hilarious. Of course I got to play into it. I didn't know it was going to match up perfectly with the next game. A little unfortunate on my part, but I was like, why not? Like, might as well. So
moms be knowing.
Yeah, they be knowing.
But the fact that it did happen in that playoff game sort of leads into something else that we really want to talk to you about, which is the dog conversation. DAWG, because we learned earlier in the show as we were setting up that Hal might be a cat person. We saw a little kitty earlier. But Hal, we earlier on the show sort of posed the question for the U.S. women's national team, who the next dog is going to be. And we were just curious to hear your thoughts about that. How do you sort of define a dog in soccer terms? And does that resonate with you in terms of your soccer persona?
For sure. First of all, I definitely am a cat person, but when it comes to the dog mentality, I fully endorse that. I feel like that's something that I like to have in my game, like being gritty, physical, and I've gotten this far from doing it. I think that's something that we at the Spirit like try to push, and I see it in the U.S. women's national team too, like just having that do or die mentality. I feel like is something that makes both those teams so successful.
Just in terms of the U.S. women's national team, I know France must have been a little bit of a weird vibe just being an alternate, but like knowing what you're getting into. But what has that journey with the national team and assimilating into the team right now at a time of change been like for you?
Going to France, of course, I was an alternate, so I was kind of like behind the scenes. I got to kind of like watch everything, but I feel like it was a really great learning moment for me, like just kind of seeing the sacrifice that it takes from everyone being in a super hard tournament environment like that. I mean, I'd previously never been out of the country before. I'd only been with the team before for a camp prior to that for probably like 10 days. So just being in that environment, I was able to learn and kind of soak up so much information, so much experiences, meet so many people. So I'm very grateful for that.
And Olympic years are always interesting in the NWSL, similar to World Cup years, because the intensity is ratcheted up for national team players like several steps. And I think what tends to happen in those years is when players come back to their leagues, in this case the NWSL, they tend to pick up injuries because there's just been such a strain on their bodies. And I know with the Spirit, that's been a particular extremely unfortunate case. So can you sort of walk us through the team's journey and having to adjust to unfortunately losing players like Ule Sarr, Corey Bethune, Andy Sullivan, Kwasi, and how you've sort of rallied and bounced back in order to continue your playoff push?
Yeah, so that has definitely been tough. Going throughout this year, we've lost so many big players when it comes to our roster. Obviously, Croy, Andy, that's like 2 out of 3 of our midfielders. And then Ule we even lost Trin for a little bit there with her back.
Right.
I think it goes to show how resilient this team is. Like the fact that we were able to have people step up in those positions. Of course, we'll never be able to like fully replace what those players gave to us. And they're such a key part of our team. I'm so excited to get them back at some point. But the fact that we have been able to like maintain our spot throughout the highs and lows of what has happened through this season, I think just goes to show how resilient we are as a group.
I do almost want to circle back for a minute. I know we're back into NWSL mode, but I want to talk to you about leaving the country for the first time because that's news to me. Like, just as someone, like, what did you think of France? What was your favorite part of it? Because we were outside of that sort of Olympic bubble in Paris, right? Like, I had never been to Nice or Marseille. I became immediately obsessed with Marseille. So just wondering, like, what your takeaways were from, like, the travel part of a major tournament.
It was so cool. I mean, traveling with the national team, you get kind of spoiled, like with the flights and everything. So I was like, oh, this is nice. It definitely put my expectations up here for any time that I have to travel again. But it was just so cool, like seeing different cultures, like meeting new people. I mean, even meeting people that we played against that were from completely different countries and stuff like that. It was a little hot there because the AC is a little lacking in Europe, and it was summertime, but it was great. I mean, the food was great. Paris was beautiful. I got to see the Eiffel Tower. Never thought that would happen, but it was all really insane.
And Hal, I know you're a coffee girly. I know all about your TikToks with the coffee reviews. We've had conversations about that before. What was your cafe experience like in France? Was it did it align with what you sort of thought, or did it blow your mind? Was it underwhelming? How would you rate your French coffee experience?
Yeah, so I feel like the coffee shops there are definitely different. Like, you're not going to have all the frou-frou drinks and, like, options that you have in the States. Like, the pumpkin spice lattes don't exist over there. But they have really good coffee. And, like, I feel like the vibes at their cafes are really nice, and they're so cool. And, you know, the little bookshops that are also coffee stores. I love that. So it was cool.
Yeah, I know, to your point about the heat, it was definitely quite toasty. And it was a real journey of, like, I found one place in Paris finally that A, had like an incredible breakfast sandwich, but B, had iced coffee. And it was like the best discovery I made that entire trip of just like, oh, an iced coffee. What a pleasure.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
Just in terms of, I guess, that shift back, I mean, there are, you know, games awaiting this team again. Obviously, you've gotten your first cap under your belt, but in terms of, you know, the 3 games in that international window that the team went through, what the takeaways are heading into, I think, what is maybe the bigger challenge of the away trip to England and Netherlands. Obviously, the Lily Johannes news coming out this week has been pretty major. So, like, what is the vibe around the national team heading into this final window?
Honestly, like, I feel pretty good vibes just because we were able to rotate so much throughout these past 3 games, and we still came up with wins, which is always great to see. I mean, even players with their first caps, like, there was so many of us, and we were able to pull out with 3 wins, which was really nice. And then I feel like that's good energy going into this bigger trip going to Europe. 2 really good teams that we have to play against, and of course Lily's a baller, so that's exciting. But yeah, all exciting things.
And looking ahead to Europe, one thing that I think immediately registered with fans when it comes to you as a soccer player are your tattoos. And I know a lot of European players, Brazilian players, a lot of non-American players, I think, embody the sort of tattoo culture that you do. So I'm curious, like, how much you pay attention to other players' tattoos. Where do you draw your inspiration from? Are there any plans to sort of get new ink to commemorate this huge season for you? Just talk to us about your tattoo life.
I've wanted tattoos since I was really, really young. I didn't really I feel like it was normal where I'm from. Like, in the South, I feel like a lot of people have tattoos, and that's just something that I grew up around. So I've always wanted a sleeve since I was younger. I got my first one on my ribs, and my mom was like, you're going to stop there, right? And I was like, yeah. And as soon as I got to college, I just started filling up my arm, and I definitely want to add more. I don't have any ideas as of right now, but since I'm a little filled up at the moment, so if I see something that I really like, I'll have to go for that. But I typically wait for the off season to get them because I can go back to my artists that I trust and love dearly. So yeah.
Amazing. All right, let's focus on this upcoming playoff game a little bit more. Gotham obviously presents its own unique set of challenges, but how much, we started this conversation with the home atmosphere, Audie. How important do you think that's going to be again, and maybe giving a little bit of that psychological advantage this weekend?
I think it's going to be so important, especially because Gotham's a team that we've already met twice earlier this season, and we've been successful both times. They're going to have some of that, FU energy because of the previous results. So I feel like the home crowd is going to be very important for us to kind of keep fueling our fire. They're a great team, and I think we honestly need to scratch the past results that we've had from them and treat this as a brand new game, because at the end of the day, if you lose, you go home. It doesn't matter how well you did in this season. So I feel like really the crowd will help us attack this game head on. And it's always great when you have people screaming and yelling behind you while you're making big tackles, big saves, scoring goals, creating opportunities. I feel like it just kind of fuels your fire.
One of the sort of defining characteristics, I think, for this Washington Spirit team this season has been its massive and massively influential rookie class, of which, of course, you are a part. Can you talk to us about sort of that class? And I can only imagine the bonding that you guys have all had this season, in addition to the fact that, you know, we've read that you spent time with Croy Bethune as a kid. Of course, you played with McKenna Morris at Clemson. So there were, I imagine for you, some added relationships that you just got to build upon. But what's the experience been like in your rookie season to be playing alongside so many other rookies and then making it to the playoffs like this?
Yeah, it's been so cool just kind of having a group of us. I feel like strength in numbers. Like, you have people beside you that are going through the same thing, like all the weirdness and new things that come with being in a brand new league with different players at different level. So that's definitely kind of helped in terms of like bonding. I feel like the reason why we've been so impactful on this team is because they've never once treated us or looked at us like rookies. I remember vividly even coming in, they were like, I hate the word rookie, like our coaches, because at the end of the day, like they want us to be contributing members, like regardless of how old we are. But yeah, it's been really cool, especially, this is a weird fact, but like everyone in the rookie class, like me and McKenna were at Clemson, obviously, like we played them, like our fifth year at Clemson, like my fifth year at Clemson, we played them. In that season. So it was weird to see like all these people we had played before the previous season, like on our team. It was really cool, but we were like, hey, kind of know you guys already. But yeah, it's been really cool to have such a good group, and on the field and off the field, I mean, they're like my best friends. So that's also a plus.
All right, Hal, we super appreciate you taking the time, especially on a busy week with a playoff game that's waiting for you. But just like one last one in terms of, I guess, if you could tell people like what makes this Washington Spirit team so special heading into this game, right? And why you guys deserve to make it to the final and make it all the way. Like, what is the thing that maybe has gone under the radar a little bit about this team this season?
I just honestly, I mean, that's a loaded question because I feel like there's so many things. But
That's fair.
First of all, I think why we've been so successful this year is like the love that we have for each other, like how much people are willing to make big plays and like sacrifice, like even T missing her sister's wedding this past week. Like that's insane, but that just shows how committed she is to this group. And then also, once again, I'm going to use T as an example because wow. But like how anyone can make an impact and anyone can make big time plays. Like we had a center back tie up a game in a playoff game. That's huge. So just stuff like that, I feel like, and like each of our rookies scoring, I feel like anyone on our team has the possibility to make a big impact, which is really sick to be a part of. Just the trust that we have for each other, and the big roles that we all play. It's just great to see, great to be a part of.
Hal Hershfelt, a cat person who's also a dog. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for giving us the behind the scenes of the Spirit's journey, your journey as a rookie, tattoos, coffee. I feel like we could have had a whole other segment of a conversation, but thank you so much for joining us and best of luck this weekend.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's award season in the NWSL, and to break down all of the categories, all the nominees, and of course to get into a little bit of debate about who we each think should win each award, we have brought on the Athletics' Jeff Rueter. Jeff, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. We so value your opinion. All right, before we get into this, I am going to read each set of nominees for each category, and then we're going to have a little discussion about each of the nominees, who we think needs to be taking home these awards. Now, just as an FYI for how the voting works, 40% of the weight of each vote goes to the players, 25% goes to owners, general managers, and coaches, another 25% goes to the media, and 10% goes to fans. So, to kick this off, the big kahuna, most valuable player. The nominees are Barbara Banda, Temwa Shawinga, Marta, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith. Jeff, this seems like an easy one, but for the sake of debate, what's your thought process here?
My thought process is it was a lot harder before the Olympics. And It actually was almost a 3-candidate race at that point. I think Sophia Smith was still having, Portland had gotten through its like first downturn at the start of the season, and she was still doing Sophia Smith things. But it really was Banda versus Chewinga at that point still, and they were. Every week it was, did you score 1 goal or 2? Did you assist 1 or 2? Did your team win or draw, right? Like there was just so much where it's like, well, this is an MVP. But since the Olympics, Tamerra Chewinga has just been operating at like a completely different caliber than not just any player now, but I would almost argue any forward we've seen since Sam Kerr. And maybe that's just like a stretch and that's like exaggerating and recency bias. But what she has done to keep the Kansas City Current on track, despite some difficulties with their game management and with some dropped results after the Olympics, and still continuing to score, still continuing to get the assists. I just think that you're kind of voting for second at a certain point. That's almost more of a discussion. But yeah, for me, it's pretty clear it's Chewinga's to lose.
I agree. And Meg, one of my favorite things about having these conversations with you is your MVP philosophy, which I would sort of define as like the emphasis on the V, right? Valuable. And valuable to whom and valuable relative to what? So this season, what was your approach to selecting an MVP?
Because usually I am kind of like the goal scoring is not as important to me, right? Like I almost always hate to actually vote Golden Boot winner as my MVP, but in this case, like I really don't think there's a debate. Tamerra Chewinga is Kansas City's most valuable player by a lot, right? Like I think there are obviously other players on that team who contribute to her success that we are going to get into in this very conversation, but in terms of what she has done in the season, the fact that she scored against every other team this year, the way that like her skill set is so complete, just all of it really is, I think, like it is Tamerra Chewinga. And what honestly now is kind of like frustrating me a little bit about the awards is that we don't really ever get voting breakdowns, because it, like, if we were any other league, I think we would be having this conversation of, is this a unanimous MVP vote, right? Like the same way that argument happens in the WNBA. This would be the same conversation we'd be having in the NWSL, and it is driving me nuts that we don't get to have it about Tamerra Chewinga, because that is the level that I think she's operating at. But to your point, like Sophia Smith is a very interesting, like when I think about value, right? Like the absence of Sophia Smith for the Portland Thorns truly proved the like valuable formula in its most pure form. Yeah. So
that's a really good point. And what you had also mentioned earlier, Jeff, about the sort of Barbara Tamerra two-way race at the beginning of the season. I think, Meg, when we had our conversation many episodes ago with Jill, I was sold on Banda as the MVP back then, mostly because of her movement off of the ball, the things the value that she has when she's off the ball. It takes a lot to make your off the ball movement that noticeable when you're playing. But yeah, having these sorts of conversations during an Olympic year when there's like such a noticeable break definitely adds a little bit of extra dimension. But for me, I have to agree. No questions. It's Tamerra Chewinga. All right.
And I will say, I mean, like, there was another of those, I guess, off-ball moments of sort, and you touched on this already briefly in the recap episode earlier in the week, but, like, the decision to not go for the hat trick and, like, make sure that Marta got her first playoff goal. Look, you don't vote on the playoffs, you vote on the regular season, but that's the sort of stuff where you're like, we're the MVP candidate frontrunner for 2025, right? Like, there isn't any issue of, like, player over team, player over result, anything like that with either of these players, which is great. Like, we just don't even really talk about the fact that Bia has been hurt the majority of the season for Kansas City. That's how good Chewinga has been, right? And, like, Bia had 5 goals, and, like, it really, I remember writing a section for the newsletter that was, like, looking at the two of them and what they were able to do together, and how it was just, like, this 2-player dynamo that you couldn't stop. And then the next week, Bia picked up an injury, and suddenly it was, okay, well, can Kansas City keep it up? And we saw what happened. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, I agree with you, Meg. It isn't just best player. It isn't just top scorer. This is value. And the Kansas City Current would be in such a worse spot without having brought in Chewinga for 2024.
We need another award that's MVP, but the P is partnership. because Temwa and BF
Yes.
for me, I'm right there with you, Jeff.
Yeah.
But let's move on to our next category, Rookie of the Year. Nominees are Croy Bethune, Claire Hutton, and Ali Sentnor. Meg, who's taking it home for you?
I still think Croy Bethune did enough at the start of the season. I mean, I feel like all three of us have been really consistent on this one in terms of I just don't think we've ever seen a debut like that in this league ever. And the fact that she matched Tobin Heath's assist record in the number of games that she did, just everything about her game, the way that she honestly changed the way that the Washington Spirit play as a rookie. Like, no offense to Claire Hutton, who I think has had a great season. No offense to Ali Sentnor, who has been such like a light in the dark for Utah, especially in the first half of that season, right?
Yeah.
Kind of keeping them moving forward in any way, shape, or form every week. But Croy Bethune is just like, that was a generational entrance into the NWSL that I think is really hard to argue against it.
Absolutely. And Jeff, Meg mentioned Ali Sentnor. Very interesting conversation. This was our last draft class in the NWSL. Ali went number 1 to the Utah Royals, who had a very typical expansion year. But can you sort of think out loud through what it means to have sort of a performance that she had as a rookie on a team that struggled like Utah? And as a follow-up, are there any rookies who did not make this shortlist that you think needs some flowers?
Yeah, I like the way of framing that, because the draft is now it's a more popular thing to say that this is a very counterproductive way to introduce a player from a player perspective into the professional ranks, right? That there is like a loss of agency in terms of where you start your career. Is it going to be a team that's built to cater to your strengths? Like, for example, if you put Croy Bethune first overall in the Utah Royals, who's finishing those chances she's creating? Right? Like, unfortunately, the reality is her numbers probably look a lot worse if she's there instead of with Washington. And you look at what Ali Sentnor has had to do with Utah Royals, and like Mike said, especially in the first half of that season, look, not the shot selection you would want to see. I think that she took such an outsized number of shots from outside the box, which generally just isn't advisable in terms of like high likelihood of converting chances. But that's what she had. And she was a player who Utah could count on to at least be dynamic in the final third, to keep an opponent honest. Obviously had a really good showing with the US youth national teams this summer as well. That just kind of reaffirms big game potential once the rest of the team rises to that level in the league hierarchy, which hopefully isn't too far away. I think it's just something like that where you look and say it's a hard year. It's hard to be picked first overall, especially by an expansion team, because you are one of the 5 or 6 players they're going to be building around. Ready or not, here you go. And I think that it was a really good first impression. But overall, I mean, this is the final draft. It's a good thing. What a class to go out with. Like, this has just been not just a top heavy. You've got some bona fide stars. I think Sentnor can get there. I think Croy Bethune is there. I think that you talk about Claire Hutton and already being able to step in and anchor a midfield the way that she has been fantastic. But then you're overlooking and you're like, okay, let's look back through the draft class. Hal Hershfelt, not just saying that because I know who the other guest on this episode is, but a very good season, supplanted Paige Mateer out of the lineup in training camp and was able to hold on to that midfield spot and really make it her own and build herself into the U.S. Women's National Team squad, which is...
I don't even think of Hal Hershfelt as a rookie. Like,
yeah.
Like,
yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Totally
I agree.
fair.
I was just going to say, I think the one sort of adjective that I would use to define this whole rookie class across the league is by their maturity. They are all incredibly mature and don't even seem to have needed to make any real adjustments between college or club and the league. And it seems like that trend is just going to continue. Yeah. Going maybe to the other end of things, let's talk about goalkeepers. Goalkeeper of the Year nominees: Ann-Katrin Berger, Mandy Hott, and Anna Morehouse. Jeff, was this an easier one for you?
Easier down the stretch. I also just remembered Emma Sears was like late second round. Like, this is a deep rookie class. Not as deep of a goalkeeper class, but to be fair, you can only have one regular goalkeeper per team. You're only going to have 14 candidates to go with. Right. So it is a little bit easier. You look, Gotham had tied for the fewest goals allowed along with Orlando, but I gave Ann-Katrin Berger the edge. I mean, I went on the TikTok and Instagram reels, whatever, talking about goals prevented last week and mentioning, outperforming expected goals incurred on target and keeping them out of goal is like the best shot that we have in advanced data right now to really make that case. And there's your number one goalkeeper. And it matches the eye test. It matches what she's able to do to help Gotham build out of the back and to do some sweeper actions and claim crosses and corner kicks to really keep the team out of danger, which is so important. But I like the case for Mandy Hott in goal for goalkeeper of the year. And it's a case that is eerily similar. I mean, you see it in the past, right? Like an overworked goalkeeper is going to...
or Boston Breakers.
That's a great example. That's a perfect example. Overworked is going to face a lot of shots, is going to have a chance to make a lot of saves.
Is having the worst year of her life.
Right, exactly. Misery, but we should probably give a trophy for that to make it a little more palatable. Like, I think that she's proven, like Alyssa Nair with Boston, to have a future with the U.S. program as well. I think that she's someone that is going to continue to, with a better defense in front of her, be able to showcase what she can do more holistically with the ball at her feet, for example. But for me, it's Berger's this year.
And Meg, even having made it to this sort of final round of goalkeeper of the year has to, for speaking to that eye test, but it's sort of in a different way in terms of raising a profile. Even that sort of feels like an accomplishment for a goalkeeper who was on, like Ali Sentnor, a team that struggled with the Utah Royals. Do you agree, Meg?
Yeah, I mean, also I think Mandy Hott has been on a lot of people's radars just because of her season last year with Gotham, right? And so it's not like a surprise, I think, by any stretch, but I do think, AKB, in terms of what she offers Gotham, sometimes it really does come down to like who feels a little bit flashier, right? Like Anna Morehouse does have the shutout records, but also I think Orlando is such a complete team defensively that it feels a little harder to justify that as a vote sometimes. Like, it is kind of strange with goalkeepers where sometimes they get punished by how good their team is and rewarded by how bad their team is in front of them, which is like this exact conversation that we're having. But AKB, I think, does kind of hit that sweet spot of has had to come up big multiple times for Gotham, has kept them in games where maybe they didn't necessarily deserve to be in games at that particular stage. And I think just also it is maybe a little unfortunate, but I think the international profile also is going to maybe sway votes, because you just think about like her standing with her hands behind her back for Germany, like that has not really been a factor in the NWSL, but like it is in people's heads probably when they are voting. So
yeah, I definitely think AKB benefits from awards like this because she is such a big, visible, noticeable player. And it's hard to imagine this going to anyone else. Also, retroactively, I did not make clear that my Rook of the Year vote also goes to Croy Bethune. So just for the record, I agree with you both.
I suppose we never said that, did we? No, it
was implied.
It was implied. I pretty heavily implied. We were all on the same page on that.
Yeah, she's a pretty inevitable player.
Yeah.
All right, Defender of the Year. I admit, I'm just going to say off top, I'm still undecided. This is going to be
I still have not submitted my ballot. This is where I'm like, I'm ready to be sold.
Yes.
Fam, well, like sell me on a candidate.
Let's make some cases.
Let's do it.
Naomi Girma, Kaylee Kurtz, Tara McKeown, Emily Sams, and Kylie Strom. Meg, what's the sort of like spread for you right now?
What's funny is, and I feel like we could set off a real internet flame war here.
Let's do it.
Naomi Girma feels like the least, like the number 5 candidate on this list, right?
Yeah.
And that's not at any expense of Naomi Girma or her performance this season, but it is, I think, simply just kind of, again, this natural tie-in with team performance and the fact that, like it does remind me a little bit of the Becky Sauerbrunn effect of we all love and respect Naomi Girma, and thus there is kind of this reach for, we know who she is as a defender. She's one of the best defenders in the world. That to me is not in question, but in terms of this award, I basically have instantly ruled her out from getting my final vote. Now, for the rest of them, it is really interesting because I think there is, a tougher case trying to figure out who maybe has the better case out of the two Orlando players between Emily Sams and Kylie Strom. I mean, we've already even had internally some debate about that. Kaylee Kurtz, I think, has had such a great season for the North Carolina Courage. And then Tamerra McKeown, I mean, again, just to everything Hal Hershfelt has already told us, like, has had such a clutch season for Washington. So I don't know. I mean, with a lot of these awards, I don't know if there's like a wrong answer, but this is why I think this is the one where I'm like, I'm willing to entertain being swayed here.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And there's such an ironic sort of paradox between the conversation, just to touch on Naomi. Throughout the year, people have been pissed about the way she's been snubbed from other award categories, Football of the Year, only for her to be nominated for this one and have this sort of collective, we don't want to say it out loud, but we're all kind of wondering how. But I have to agree. And I know, Meg, you had said previously that Abby Dahlkemper was
Abby Dahlkemper was on my final 5 that I submitted, because also, again, if you're going to have a San Diego Wave defender / turned Bay FC defender, Abby Dahlkemper turned that Bay FC season. Like, completely. Yeah. I mean, it has been one of the most commonly accepted narratives of the second half of the season. And so I honestly was just very surprised to not see her in that final 5.
Jeff, as we think about the position of a defender and how the sort of evolution has been the extent to which they can also get involved in the attack. For me, one of the things that is currently leaning me a little bit more in Kaylee Kurtz's direction than anyone else is her pass accuracy, the way that she's able to penetrate those midfield lines and deliver passes into the attack. I think that has been huge, especially for a possession-oriented team like the Courage. But how are you sort of thinking of what's your sort of scoring rubric for a defender in the NWSL this season?
It's shifting, to your point. Like, it definitely, I think that this is usually the award where you see in other leagues where like MLS breaks down defender, all of its awards. So you can see the top 3, but not everyone who got votes. And it's always like, with some of these, because it just feels like, look, most of us don't watch soccer for the defenders, like it or not. And so often a good defender is the one you never notice. But if you don't notice a player, you're not going to vote for them for an award.
Right. This is why holding midfielders need so much more attention.
Yeah, I think so, right? Like certain players just don't jump off the page or aren't marketable or aren't whatever. And so I think usually it is where you get into reputation, which is where I think Naomi Gerba, of course, ends up. Like, if you had to name 5 defenders you thought were good this year, I think most people were like, Gerba? Right? Like, just like kind of like probably inevitably was better than most defenders in the league, regardless of how San Diego Waves defense played this year. And I think that you have to factor in link-up play. You have to factor in aerial prowess in all areas of the field, and that could mean winning headers in the box to score crucial goals, right? Like, for your team instead of just preventing them. So I think that this is a year where it feels wide open. I think that you have 2 candidates from one of the 2 best defenses in the league who are going to possibly take votes off of each other. I think it's really weird that there's no one from Gotham who's in this category right now. I think
we gotta have a Gotham talk. You could have put a pin in that. We'll come back.
We'll come back to that. Okay, got it. Because there's 2 players, 3 probably, where I'm like, where are they? So I think of who is on this list, I'm leaning Kaylee Kurtz as well. And I think that a big part of it, some of this feels not career achievement, but like recency achievement for like the Iron Woman streak, I think is not insignificant. I think it is a skill to play every single minute of a season. That's a valuable skill to have too. So that is going to carry a little bit of weight for me. But then, like you said, helping a team play out of the back that wants to play with possession, you see how effective that is in close matchups like they had over the weekend, just to be able to keep in a game even when the shots aren't going in. To still do the defensive bedrock work that keeps opponents from being able to wreak havoc, all these sorts of things. I think the most all-around best defensive season, I think, was Kaylee Kurtz's this year. But I will say that if there was a year where a fullback would finally just like break through the door and say like, hey, you've got to vote for me, I was the best player, it's probably this year. It's just that so often we look at defenders and think, defenders, winning headers, tackles, interceptions, center backs. And so a center back almost always wins this thing. But this feels like it could be a good year for a fullback who's also sending in crosses and creating chances and all those other things in the final third, as well as everywhere else on the field.
Defenders containing multitudes. We'd love to see that evolution. All right, midfielder of the year. Very exciting category. Croy Bethune, again. Vanessa DiBernardo, Lola Bonta, Marta, again. And Ashley Sanchez. I forget who I last called on first. I think we're going to you, Jeff.
Okay.
Who's taking this one for you?
It's funny because I think of this when I heard this was coming from Meg, I was just like, oh, this is like the Sam Coffey makeup award, because last year I really was stumping hard for Sam Coffey for MVP, and then ultimately, like, look, worthy winner, Caroline, all these things, but I still think Sam Coffey should have won it. So it seemed like, okay, let's give the midfielders award and we'll not run into that again. They should have an
award. This is where, like, again, holding midfielders, right? Like, and it's going to be tough because midfielders contain multitudes as well.
Yeah.
So it is going to be really interesting of, like, how people value which midfielder role is going to get a vote.
Yeah, because you could go any of three ways, right? You could go with attacking midfielders, and there's Marta, and there's Croy Bethune, or you could go for a defensive midfielder like Sam Coffey, right? But, like, I'm going with Vanessa DiBernardo on this one this year. And I think it's sort of a play both sides of it. The dual-facetedness of that role, I think, is so important, where it's look for a player, because otherwise you do run the risk of an attacking midfielder winning MVP and midfield. And risk isn't a bad thing. It's just there's one less news cycle that you get to keep your awards in. If it's, okay, this player won midfield of the year, well, they're going to win MVP too, right? Depending how they roll these out. So I really think, again, to go back to Kansas City and Bia's injury and having to kind of reinvent on the fly after how their first impression went, which was so strong, but to continue to have a player who has been in the league for a long time, who has been playing, who had to play some very thankless roles for Chicago in particular in past seasons, and then finally is able to come in and be like, hey, you should be more creative and you should maybe like generate chances of your own too, right? Like all of these things, I think it's just, again, this maybe is a little bit more of a reward for past seasons as well. But personally, I think overall the best rounded player who did a little bit of everything in midfield was DiBernardo for me.
Well, speaking of flowers for past seasons, Meg, walk us through your choice.
Yeah. This is maybe like my most sentimental vote by a lot, but, you know, in terms of midfielder on the best team of the year, Marta, for me, like, she has had a season that we haven't seen from her basically since she joined the league, right? Like,
yeah.
It doesn't feel like I'm giving her a vote just to give her a vote either. I think she does have a very legitimate case at midfielder of the year. And I think also, if you want to talk about kind of off the ball / just a leader of that team, right? I don't know if that season happens without Marta at the heart of this Orlando Pride team. So, yes, like, there's all the sentimental reasons to vote for her, but I think there are actually, like, very tangible reasons. But maybe this is also, too, where we could bring in some of this Gotham conversation. Because when I look back at my 5 from that first round of voting where, you know, you get to, like, whittle the field down, first of all, justice for Taylor Flint, too. I want to point that one out.
Yeah, agreed.
But Neely Martin was my other pick that did not make this final list. And Gotham, for me, is such a hard team to talk about in individual awards because Gotham just don't play a system that, like, flatters any individual player like that. And I feel like that's where the struggle is, too, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you imagine, if everyone was healthy, right? And unfortunately, Gotham had some really tough injuries at the start of the season, and this season could have looked very different with Midge Purse, for example, right? And if you have that many really, really talented players who would be among the 2 or 3 best players on, let's say, 9 or 10 NWSL squads this year, inevitably they're going to have, I mean, like, when you look at their output, it's going to be 80% of what you would see if they were on Chicago. Like, not even like the worst teams in the league, but like the teams that were not in the top 4, because I think there was such a clear top 4 everyone else this season. And so you put that much talent on one roster, and then you have an Olympics as well, where a lot of these players are coming and going. It gets very difficult, right, to identify, like, that's the one who makes it tick. Like, I think there's like a couple who were kind of that, like, hipster pick where it was like Ella Stevens is having a great season finally, right, in a different role. Yasmin Ryan, right? Yeah. Like, someone I had on my preseason watch list that ended up aging very well. Some other picks aged very poorly from that article, but we won't talk about them. But like you look and it's hard to like identify. That's a team that feels so much like a collective, a juggernaut. Like you're not talking about in the same way of Chowinga in Kansas City or Barbara Banda and Marta and Orlando, right? Where it's like they're almost backup singers in a weird way. The rest of the team feels like it, and then there's like one lead singer. It's everyone. It's a choir, and it works so well, but it's so hard to pick out individual voices from within it that you just kind of forget about who is like the heart and soul of it in a way.
Totally agree. Then that's beautiful imagery, and now I'm thinking of like a symphony and just musical.
It works.
My vote also went to Vanessa DiBernardo. I will just quickly say that she is sort of like a polyglot of a midfielder. She plays with everyone. She can adjust to everybody's style of play, their speed of play, and give them what they need, and that is an invaluable skill. So she got my vote. Last category, Coach of the Year. Speaking of Gotham, Juan Carlos Amoros, Vlatko Ananovsky, and Seb Hines. Meg, who's getting this one?
For me, it was Seb Hines. Just again, I think it maybe extends a little bit past this year, but just the Orlando story, I think it's really hard to not vote. And I don't know if there's a wrong choice on this one, because I think Juan Carlos Amoros, again, has like completely changed Gotham in all of the best ways, right? And won deservedly last year. But I'm like, okay, you won last year.
Yeah.
Vlatko Ananovsky, I think, has obviously like, again, had a major impact at Kansas City. I think is a much happier man. But when it comes down to, I mean, just the Orlando story for 2024, it's really hard to not vote for Seb Hines. It's just really hard.
It's really interesting to think about the different sort of weights that these three coaches have been carrying. All heavy, but all very different. You have one coach, Jeff, who is attempting a two-peat championship, who last season was also in a similar but still distinct rebuilding season that Seb Hines has been in this season.
Yeah.
You have Vlatko, who has several chips and some dip on his shoulder coming off of course, the U.S. Women's National Team performance at the World Cup. A lot to prove. All three have had a lot to prove, but in very different ways. So, Jeff, how were you sort of assessing each of the burdens, so to speak, that they were shouldering to arrive at your decision?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about this with someone who, this is years ago, left The Athletic since we had this conversation, covered a very different sport than soccer. And we were talking about like awards and what goes into it. And Coach of the Year, they'd made some comment that it was like, it almost seems like an apology, because it's like the award is given to the coach whose team did way better than you thought they were going to do. Like, you rarely will give it to, we predicted you to finish first, you finished first, congratulations, here's your trophy, right? Like, it's just, it feels like an award that's kind of like a, wow, you did that. I can't believe you did that. Here's a trophy, right? Like, it's a little bit more of an admittance of coming out of nowhere. And I think that the scale of Orlando's ascension, not just to finally get back into the playoffs, but to win the Shield, that is like magnitudes beyond what I think a lot of people were expecting from this team, even after they signed Barbara Banda. So I think that that's different than Andonovsky coming into Kansas City. Again, this is a coach who, yes, struggled a lot. I've certainly lobbed plenty of criticism about his tenure at the U.S. Women's National Team at The Athletic and elsewhere, but has been proven at the NWSL level, has been proven to be successful with the club model. It's why he wanted to stick with the club model of running a national team, and it didn't really work. But then you get back into a familiar setting and everything just kind of comes off, and adjusting to injuries on the fly and players coming and going on that squad with how they managed player transactions, right? Unpopular, but like to have to keep a cohesive locker room is no small feat in light of that looming thought that you'll just be traded without being talked about, you know, which players started at the beginning of the season and the off season with. And then you look at Juan Carlos, and that's a super team. That was a team that we were looking at as the free agents were being announced, where it was just like, who's going to even beat this team, right? And there is an improvement over the regular season, but like you said, won last year, won the title last year, and it pretty much was just taking a good team that was a good playoff team and turning it into a great team, which just feels like a slightly less impressive task than taking a team that missed the playoffs and having them win the Shield.
Yeah, that's a really interesting analogy about this being an apology award.
Yeah.
But I agree with the two of you. What Seb Hines and his coaching staff have done with the Pride has been extraordinary. I mean, I honestly think even if they had not won the Shield this season, it would have still gone to him, because when you look at this club's history, what he was able to do in the span of a season and a half, give or take, is incredibly impressive. And this is, of course, in an expanding, only getting more competitive league. So maybe following season we'll be giving JCA an apology coaching award, depending on how things go.
Yeah.
But really appreciate the debate here. Final thoughts about any of these awards from either of you?
I'm curious to see what they'll do in light of Rookie of the Year next year. Yes. I looked back at the ballot I had for MLS. I didn't vote on NWSL awards this year, but I voted in MLS. And they had Young Player of the Year, which they brought in over the last 3 years to replace Rookie of the Year as its draft is going through its own sort of reckoning process, I guess. And it's a player this year who was born on January 1st, 2002. I feel quite old, or younger. And so you had to be 22 or younger at the start of the year.
22.
Yeah.
Approach.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. But then you look and like, I mean, if you run it that way, then like you're throwing Trinity Rodman into this field. And like for a fourth year play, I had to confirm a birth date quick, pardon the Google. But like that's a fourth year pro. And right, like, and it just feels very bizarre to have a player with that background, pedigree, consistency to be up against players like we were talking about with Ali Sentner and others, you know, who are truly making their first entry into the professional ranks.
It might have to be some sort of combo where it's like both U22 and also first season in the league, and they're just going to have to like put some extra parameters in. Yeah. But also, I think, you know, it is kind of. I mean, to be fair, both Temo Chawinga and Barbara Banda have like immediately bypassed the need for a new Player of the Year award because they have graduated right to MVP. Yeah. But I think there's also maybe even a case for that of like you have maybe some more distinct categories of both like a young player but also a newcomer type. You know, like there's some room to wiggle around in, and if they get a sponsor for it to toss, you know, $5,000 on it, then here you go.
I love the idea of awards abundance. This only means that, Jeff, we will obviously have to have you back around this time next season to discuss what will likely be an explosion of awards. Thank you very much for joining us, though. We love your opinion, and this has helped me in my own decision process.
Good. I'm glad. And if nothing else, I'm glad it helped pass the time. Thanks for having me back. It's been great.
Semifinals are upon us, Meg. We got Washington Spirit versus Gotham playing on CBS at 12 noon on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we have the Orlando Pride and Kansas City Current. The one that probably a lot of people thought was going to be the final earlier in the season. That's going to be on ABC at 3 p.m. Eastern. So much to unpack here. Let's start with Washington and Gotham. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? What do we need to be taking into consideration? This is going to be a huge match, not only because of how many people are going to be at Audi Field.
Yeah, sell out already. I mean, the fact that they sold out Audi Field by Wednesday, right after announcing. Also, I mean, I think you said this in our like group chat. As you walked out of the stadium of the Gotham game, people were like, "Do you want a ticket to this game? We got a bus going. Let's go."
They were ready.
Which I think, great development in the NWSL to see that. But yeah, I mean, this is one where, again, I think it does come down to like the Spirit have to overcome those injuries, right? They have to rely on depth. Lacey Santos, I think, probably needs to have more minutes on the field. But it's going to be really, again, it's really hard. Like I hate predictions to begin with, but like, I think for all four of these teams, for both of these semifinals, there's no like upset. Like, yes, you've got a 1 and a 4 seed and a 2 and a 3 seed. None of these are going to count as upsets in my book. All four teams deserve a spot in the final based on their performance this year. So like, yes, Spirit Gotham, good, interesting game to Hal Hershfelt's point. They have played Gotham twice, gotten the better of them twice, although the second one, Gotham was like missing a player and et cetera, right? Like there's always going to be little asterisks for regular season stuff. This is a clean slate I think, as far as everyone is concerned. And it's also honestly a very interesting coaching matchup for me, right? Like, this is going to be Geralda's first NWSL, like, big semifinal playoff game. Like, Bay, I think, yes, to some extent, but like Spirit Gotham, heavyweight versus heavyweight, it's going to be interesting.
Completely. And when I am looking for like what might define the margins between these two teams, the thing that's rising to the surface is playoff experience. I mean, we've been talking so much about how young the Spirit team is, and I do think that being young and having this maybe be your first NWSL playoff experience can sort of remove nerves, because it's just your first time. You don't know really how to gauge what this experience is going to be. That might benefit them. But I mean, looking at the super team in Gotham and just the collective playoff experience that all those players are bringing. Man.
It's going to be, I mean, I do think, like, my head is telling me Gotham, right? And that doesn't always mean anything.
Especially in this league.
Because I think it really, for both of these games, it's going to come down to the day, right? And so, but I just think about Gotham and the depth of that team, and again, like Delaney Sheehan coming off the bench and immediately like providing the assist to Rose Lavelle for that game-winning goal. Like, they got it done when it counted. I would like to see Gotham be a little more ruthless. I think that maybe is. They do. Again, they love to be kind of pretty. And they love to, like, and that's not a bad thing, but it gets harder and harder to play that sort of style in playoffs the deeper you get in.
Yeah, which really does highlight the dawg factor to the Hal Hershfelt conversation. It'll be interesting to see what role that plays in a game like that. All right, let's move on. Orlando Pride and KC. Like I said, this was the matchup that from the beginning of the season, everyone just knew spiritually, no pun intended, was going to be the final. And yet here we are in a semi. I mean, people who know ball sometimes know that semifinal games sometimes are just as spicy, if not more, than the final. Do you think that's possible in this case, Meg? I mean, we got top 4 teams. It's going to be beautiful no matter what, but this is absolutely got to be the game of the season, especially when you consider the history of beef between these two teams.
Yeah, this is the one that I think has like all of the narratives on it in a way that no other matchup remaining is going to have. Just because, you think about Orlando heading into Kansas City when both teams were still, undefeated, and Marta celebrating after that Orlando win, shushing the crowd, rocking the baby, and the reaction there. And so there is heat in
Michelle
this one.
Cooper popping off on Instagram.
100%. And so I think we had such high expectations for their second matchup in the regular season that it turned into this cagey sort of like, okay, guys, what are we doing here? Come on. And so
we want entertainment.
We want two heavyweights going at each other. We want the Banda Tamuchawinga showdown that we didn't really get the second time around, right? And so I think we can say all of that. And then also we saw Vlatko Andonovski kind of return to that form of, I will take my 1-0 lead and ride it.
Yeah. Into the sunset. Or at least like across the river or something.
Yeah. So all I can say is just like, again, spiritually, I am like sending vibes out. Please give us goals. Please give us spice. Please give us entertainment. Please get like all of these things. We deserve it. That's all I have to say. We deserve that right now in this moment in time.
We really do. And when I think, though, about the possibility that Kansas City has to play an NWSL championship at home, but then I think about the Pride's journey, again, like spiritually. I don't even want to.
Tough. It's so tough.
Yeah, I'm torn.
I don't know.
I'm completely torn, but
that's why, like, we were talking about how we preview these games, and it's just like, A, it's impossible to know, but like, B, it's so hard to not want all 4 of these teams somehow for like various reasons to want to advance. And so either way, I'm just like mostly praying for 2 really good games, high quality games that are good advertisements for this league on major television channels, and with goals and saves and all of the good stuff that we have come to expect from this league and from these top 4 teams that have so clearly set themselves apart. That's all we can hope for, I think.
And keeping in mind that bingo card, we still got some squares I mean, some, because teams have been knocked out, will not be fulfilled, so we can't exactly go for a blackout. But there are still some, like an AKB penalty save, very much on the table heading into the weekend. One thing's for sure, you can't miss it. We will be with you every step of the way. Make sure you're following us on all the socials, as I mentioned earlier. Keep up with stories that are coming out heading into the semifinals and even after by signing up for The Athletic's free newsletter, theathletic.com/fulltime. Here we go, guys. We're in it. No turning back now. Take deep breaths. We're going to get through this, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's be honest. Thank you so much for listening. Full Time with Meg Linehan. I am Tamerra Griffin alongside Meg Linehan. And in the meantime, between now and the semifinals, you can catch me, honestly, watching as many corny Netflix Christmas movies as I can, because it's that time of year for me, and maybe sharing some of my findings on Twitter and Instagram.
Yes, yeah, I have yet to shift. We've been watching The Bear, actually, finally. We have finally started The Bear. That has been our guilty pleasure watch right now. I'm actually off Twitter officially now, so you can find me on Instagram and on Blue Sky, just as a programming note. But you can also always email us at fulltime@theathletic.com.
That's a good move. I need to add that to my to-do list. Full Time is not possible without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. We'll be back next Thursday with more to break down. I can only imagine the discourse, and I can't wait to see you guys there. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.